I was rinsing out my coffee mug when the attorney said, very gently, "Before you decide anything, I think you need to see the property for yourself." I stood there with the dish towel in my hand and looked at him across his desk. My husband had been dead for 11 days. I had spent those days doing practical things, returning calls, sorting paperwork, taking casseroles out of the refrigerator and throwing them away when they went bad. I had not been prepared for a sentence like that. "The property?" I asked. He slid a small ring of keys across the desk. "The farmhouse outside Red Hollow." I did not touch them right away. In 20 years of marriage, my husband, Daniel, had never allowed me to go there. Not once. If I asked, his answer was always the same. Too dangerous. Old equipment. Weak flooring. Nothing to see. He said it in a level voice, and I had learned, over time, that when Daniel spoke that way, the subject was closed. So I looked at the keys, then back at Mr. Bell, and said, "I'll sell it." He folded his hands and gave me a long, tired look. "You can do that," he said, "but I'd still advise you to visit first." I remember the quiet hum of the ceiling vent in his office, the smell of paper and old wood polish, the way one of the blinds behind him didn't quite sit straight. "Why?" I asked. He hesitated. Not for effect. Just long enough that I understood there was something he was choosing not to say. "Because your husband left instructions," he said. "And because there are some things on that property you should see with your own eyes." I finally picked up the keys. They were colder than I expected. That night I set them on the kitchen counter beside the fruit bowl and left them there. By morning, they felt like another presence in the apartment. Daniel and I had lived a steady life in Dayton. I handled payroll and account entries for a regional plumbing supply company. He was a claims examiner for an insurance firm. We were not unhappy exactly. We were orderly. We paid bills on time. We ate dinner at the table most nights. On Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, he left before sunrise and said he was driving out to maintain the farmhouse his uncle had left him. I had accepted that explanation for years. When someone dies, you begin reviewing ordinary moments whether you want to or not. The tone of a voice. A door closed too quickly. A sentence that made no sense at the time. In the days after the funeral, I kept replaying one memory. I was 39, newly married, standing in our first kitchen, asking whether I could ride out with him one weekend and see the place. He had gone very still. Then he said, "No, Elaine. I need you to leave that alone." Not angry, not loud, just firm enough that I never asked again. By the following Monday, curiosity had settled into something quieter and heavier. It was not panic. It was not even suspicion yet. It was the simple feeling that I had lived beside a locked door for years and had finally been handed the key. So I drove out. The farmhouse sat about 90 minutes east, past stretches of winter field and feed stores and long gravel shoulders where mailboxes leaned at different angles. The morning was gray and dry. I remember the sound of stones ticking against the underside of my car when I turned onto the private road. The property was larger than I expected. A white house with a deep porch. 2 barns. A machine shed. Fencing in good repair. Nothing about it looked abandoned. That unsettled me more than if it had been falling apart. Daniel had always described it as a burden. Something old to keep from collapsing. A family obligation. But the grass around the house had been trimmed. One porch rail had been recently painted. There were tire marks in the dirt, fresh enough that I could still see tread pattern near the side entrance. I cut the engine and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. The place was quiet, but not empty quiet. Not the hollow stillness of a building left alone. I could hear a wind chime somewhere off to the side of the porch. I could smell damp cedar and cold air when I stepped out. A curtain in one of the front windows moved, just slightly, then settled. I told myself that meant nothing. A draft. A heater vent. Age in the frame. I walked to the front door, found the house key on the ring, and let myself in. The first thing I noticed was warmth. Not just temperature. Presence. The entry rug was clean, but worn in a pattern that suggested regular use. On the narrow table by the wall sat a ceramic bowl with hair ties, 2 loose crayons, and a receipt folded into quarters. There were 3 coats hanging from hooks near the kitchen doorway. One was a child's denim jacket with a missing button. Another was a green cardigan with the sleeve pushed inside itself. I closed the door behind me and stood still. From somewhere deeper in the house came the faint smell of soup or something recently heated. The living room held 2 lamps, both unplugged, a stack of library books, a basket of folded laundry, and a pair of pink sneakers no bigger than my hand. Along one wall, taped carefully at eye level for a small person, were crayon drawings on printer paper. Trees. A yellow house. A woman with long brown lines for hair. There were framed photographs on the mantel. I stepped closer and looked at them one by one. A young woman holding a baby on her hip. 2 teenage girls sitting on porch steps. A dark-haired woman in work gloves, smiling into sunlight. Children I had never seen. Faces I did not know. Not a single photograph of Daniel. Not one of me. I heard a floorboard creak overhead. I did not move at first. I just listened. Then came the soft sound of footsteps crossing the 2nd floor. Someone was upstairs. I set my purse down slowly on the nearest chair and took out my phone. The house had gone so quiet I could hear my own breathing. "Hello," I called. No answer. I looked toward the staircase, at the light falling across the banister, and then I waited. I waited long enough to hear another sound. It was not a heavy step this time, more like movement held back, a brush against a wall, the faint click of a door latch upstairs. I kept my phone in my hand and moved toward the staircase. I remember the wood under my shoes, the house settling around me, the way the air felt warmer near the 2nd floor. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I don't know who's here," I said, "but this property now belongs to me. My husband passed away last week. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need someone to come down and explain what's going on." For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a girl appeared at the top of the stairs. She looked about 15, maybe 16. Narrow shoulders. Blonde hair pulled back badly, like she had done it in a hurry. She had the kind of expression you do not forget, because it belongs to someone who has been frightened for too long and no longer expects kindness to last. One hand stayed on the banister. The other was pressed flat against her chest. "Please don't call the police," she said. Her voice was so quiet I almost missed the first part of it. Before I could answer, another woman stepped into view behind her. Older, maybe mid-30s. Dark hair tied low at the back of her neck. She had one arm slightly out, not touching the girl, but close enough that the intent was clear. Protective. Ready. She looked down at me with immediate distrust. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Elaine Mercer," I said. "My husband, Daniel Mercer, owned this property. He died in a car accident 11 days ago. His attorney gave me the keys this morning. I came here because I was told I needed to see this place for myself." The older woman's expression changed, though only by a fraction. "Daniel was your husband?" "Yes." The girl made a sound I can only describe as a breath catching in the middle. The older woman glanced at her, then back at me. "He never told us he was married," she said. There are moments when your mind does not react all at once. It arranges things quietly. A sentence, a missing piece, a door inside your life opening onto another door. I climbed the stairs slowly, giving both of them time to move away if they wanted. I stopped several feet short of the landing. "What did he tell you?" I asked. The older woman studied my face with the caution of someone who had learned to measure risk in small details. My coat, my shoes, my tone, whether my hands were shaking. Then, finally, she said, "My name is Mara. The girl is Lily. There's another resident out in town right now with her son. We've been staying here." "Staying here how?" She let out a breath through her nose, not impatient, more resigned. "Living here," she said, "because we had nowhere safe to go." I looked past her then, into the upstairs hall. 2 bedroom doors were open. I could see made beds, folded blankets, a plastic laundry basket on the floor, a half-finished jigsaw puzzle on a card table near the window. It was not chaos. It was not a scam. The place had the careful order of people trying not to take up too much space. Lily spoke next, staring at the stair tread instead of at me. "He found me at the transit station in West Haven." Her words came slowly, as though each one had to be checked before it was released. "I'd been there 2 nights. Maybe 3. I wasn't really keeping track. He bought me coffee first, then food. He asked if I needed a place to stay where no one would ask questions for a while. I said nothing. He told me there were rules, she went on. No posting pictures. No telling anyone the address. No bringing strangers here. Help with meals if I could. Keep my room clean. That was it. Mara added, he did the same for me. Different place. Different circumstances. Same rules. I looked from one to the other. How long? Almost 4 years for me, Mara said. 7 months for Lily. For years. For 4 years, on 3 mornings a week, my husband had left our apartment in pressed shirts and work boots and driven out here to a life he had never mentioned. I thought of all the ordinary evenings we had spent across from each other at the table. Pot roast, broiled fish, winter soup, television murmuring afterward. Him asking if there was more iced tea, me reminding him the electric bill was due Thursday. An entire second world had been sitting just beyond reach of those conversations. Why didn't he tell me? I asked, though I was not sure whether I was speaking to them or to myself. Mara answered with more honesty than comfort. I don't know. Maybe he was private. Maybe he was trying to protect the place. Maybe he didn't think anyone outside it would understand. The sentence landed where it needed to. It was not cruel. It was only direct. I walked to the hall window and looked out over the drive, the machine shed, the line of bare trees beyond the fence. My reflection in the glass looked composed. That surprised me. Inside, things were rearranging fast. What exactly was this place to him? I asked. Mara leaned one shoulder against the wall. A safe house, I guess. Though he never called it that. He said labels brought attention. He preferred systems. That sounded like Daniel. She told me more after that, not in a rush, but in pieces. Women had come and gone over the years. Some stayed a week. Some stayed a year. Some had children. Some had court dates or hospital appointments or jobs they were trying to hold together. He kept records, she said. Not just names. Intake dates. Emergency contacts when there were any. Medication lists. Small cash expenses. Grocery receipts. Copies of identification if the women were willing to make them. He handled things quietly, methodically. He had a room downstairs, Mara said. An office. He locked it, but he worked in there all the time. What kind of work? The kind that keeps people off paper until they're ready to be on it, she said. He'd make calls, print forms, drive people to appointments under other names, use post office boxes, replace phones, keep track of who might be looking. I turned and looked at her. That's illegal. It might have been, she said. Some of it, maybe. Some of it was just careful. Again, not defensive. Just factual. Lily had sat down on the top stair by then, knees together, hands clasped. She looked exhausted. Younger than she had a minute earlier. There was a bruise fading along the inside of one wrist. Small, yellow at the edges. I noticed Mara saw me notice it. Is someone looking for her? I asked. Mara did not answer right away. Before she could, Lily looked past me toward the front of the property, and all the color left her face. There's a truck, she said. We moved to the window together. A dark pickup had just turned onto the drive. It was still far enough away that I could not make out the driver clearly, but it was moving slowly. Not uncertainly. Intentionally. The kind of approach that suggests the driver already knows where he is going. Mara went still in a way that made the whole hallway change temperature. Did anyone see you come here? She asked. I don't think so. Did you stop anywhere nearby? No, she shut her eyes for one short second, then opened them again. That may not matter. Lily was already backing away from the window. Who is it? I asked. Mara's voice dropped lower. It may be her stepfather. The truck kept coming, gravel shifting under the tires in slow bursts. Lily's breathing had become shallow and fast. Mara took hold of her shoulders and said, very clearly, go to the back room. Closet, if you need to. Stay quiet until I come get you. Lily nodded once and disappeared down the hall. I looked at Mara. Tell me what's going on. She watched the truck for another second, then said, his name is Aaron Pike. He's been trying to find her. If it's him, he won't come here to ask nicely. The sentence settled between us. A week earlier, if someone had put that situation in front of me on paper, I would have approached it in the clean order I used at work: ownership, liability, police report, legal exposure, insurance. I would have seen risk first, and I would not have been wrong. But standing there in that hallway, hearing the truck approach while a frightened girl hid in an upstairs closet, I found that my mind had become very simple. There was a person in danger. There was a property in my name. And there was only one front door. "You stay with her," I said. Mara stared at me. "Mrs. Mercer, Elaine." She did not argue again. I handed her my purse without thinking, kept my phone, and walked downstairs. The truck stopped near the porch. A man got out. Mid-40s, maybe. Heavy through the shoulders. Work jacket. Ball cap. He closed the truck door without slamming it, then looked over the house the way a surveyor might look over a line he intended to cross. I opened the front door before he reached it and stepped outside behind it, pulling it nearly shut with my body between the gap and the interior hall. The afternoon air had cooled. I could smell diesel and damp gravel. "Can I help you?" I asked. He looked at me, then at the house behind me. "I'm looking for a girl," he said. "Blonde. 16. Thin. Might be using a different name." His tone was almost casual. That made it worse. "And you are?" "Aaron Pike." I gave him nothing with my face. "This is private property, Mr. Pike." He shifted his weight, eyes still on the house. "Then maybe you can save us both time. My stepdaughter ran off months ago. I've got reason to think she's been hidden around here." "By whom?" He smiled a little, but there was no friendliness in it. "People who interfere in family matters." I heard the wind chime again behind the corner of the porch. One light, misplaced note. "My husband owned this place," I said. "He's deceased. I'm here handling the estate. No one is being hidden by me. Mind if I take a look around?" "Yes," I said. There was a pause after that. He took one step closer, not enough to justify panic, but enough to test the line. "I think you should reconsider." I kept my voice level. "I don't need to reconsider. If you have a warrant, you can show it to me. If you believe a minor is in danger, you can contact the sheriff's office. But you are not entering this house because you asked in a tone you thought might work." His eyes settled on mine then, properly, for the first time. That was the moment I understood two things. First, that he was used to people moving aside for him before he had to ask twice. Second, that Daniel had not kept this place hidden because he was embarrassed or eccentric or untrusting. He had kept it hidden because men like this existed. Aaron glanced past my shoulder toward the narrow opening at the door edge. I moved half an inch, enough to close it. "I drove a long way," he said. "So did I." He gave a small shrug, as if we were discussing weather, not access to a house where a terrified girl was hiding. "You don't know what kind of trouble she's caused. I know enough to say you can leave now." His jaw shifted once. Then he smiled again, smaller this time. "Your husband knew better than to stand in my way." I felt that sentence exactly where he intended it to land. Still, I kept my voice even. "My husband is dead. If you're trying to make a point, make it clearly." For the first time, his expression slipped. Not much. Just enough to show me there was pleasure in the uncertainty. "Clear enough," he said. He stepped back from the porch. I did not relax. Men like that often retreat only to improve the angle. Finally, he turned, walked to his truck, and opened the door. Before getting in, he looked back toward the upstairs windows. Then he said, "You'll want to be careful out here. Roads can get lonely." He got in and drove away slowly. I stayed on the porch until the truck disappeared past the gate and the sound of the engine thinned into the distance. Only then did I go back inside and lock the door. Mara was at the foot of the stairs. She had not moved far from them. "He'll come back," she said. I nodded once. "Yes." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I put the phone face down on the entry table, looked toward the closed hallway door she had mentioned earlier, and said, "Show me Daniel's office." Then I waited. Mara led me down a short hallway off the kitchen to a door I had assumed was a storage room. It was locked. She reached to the top of the frame, felt along the trim, and brought down a small brass key. "He kept it there," she said. "Plain sight if you knew where to look." The office smelled faintly of toner, paper, and the drywall scent Daniel's coats used to carry in winter. It was a small room, but every inch of it had been used carefully. A metal desk, 2 file cabinets, a printer on a side table, shelves with binders, legal pads, envelopes, county maps, and a row of labeled plastic boxes. Nothing decorative, nothing accidental. The window looked out toward the side yard and the machine shed. From there, whoever sat at the desk could see anyone driving long before they reached the house. I stood in the doorway for a moment and took it in. This was the most familiar room in the house. Not because I had seen it before, but because it was built in Daniel's exact language. Order, containment, quiet process. The things he could not say, he had apparently arranged into folders. Mara closed the door behind us. "There's more," she said, and moved to the desk. She opened the top center drawer and removed a tray of pens, paper clips, and stamps. Underneath, it was a second panel, cut flush with the bottom. She pressed at one corner. It lifted cleanly. Inside were 3 items: a hardbound ledger, a thick envelope secured with a rubber band, and a flash drive with a strip of masking tape labeled simply, May. I looked at the handwriting on the label and knew at once it was his. I picked up the ledger first. It was not personal in the way a diary is personal. It was Daniel's version of confession, which meant dates and entries and clean margins. The first pages held names, most of them first names only, followed by intake dates, medication notes, emergency contacts when available, and brief remarks in the same narrow hand. Kara, arrived with toddler, no ID on person, cousin in Toledo, possible backup. Janine, wrist fracture healing poorly, follow-up Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. Lily, claims stepfather searching, use back route to county clinic. I kept turning pages. Some entries were brief and administrative. Others expanded unexpectedly, only for a few lines, before returning to the practical. It became clear very quickly that Daniel had not been improvising. He had developed a system over years. Safe arrival, immediate needs, medical attention, temporary alias where necessary, legal referral when possible, exit planning, small cash recorded down to the dollar. Nothing lavish, nothing careless. He had built a structure out of caution, and he had hidden it inside our marriage. My throat tightened, but I did not stop reading. Mara stood near the shelves with her hands in the pockets of her sweater, watching me without interruption. She seemed to understand that this kind of shock works slowly. It does not arrive as a dramatic blow. It settles through the body in layers. "How many?" I asked after a while. "Over the years?" I nodded. She looked toward the ledger. "I never counted them all." I did. Not that minute, but my eyes had already begun sorting categories, dates, durations. It is a habit I have had since my 20s. When something feels too large, I start with countable things. I turned farther in and found a section where Daniel had created summary pages for each year. Number of residents, average length of stay, cash outflow, utility increase, medical transport miles, volunteer hours from what looked like 2 trusted people whose names were listed only as initials. It was not amateur work. It was restrained, disciplined, sustained. He had been doing this for at least 9 years. 9. I set the ledger down carefully and picked up the envelope. Inside were photographs printed on matte paper. The first showed the farmhouse from across the road through bare tree branches. The second showed the side yard, zoomed in close enough to catch Mara carrying groceries from a car. The third showed Lily sitting on the porch steps with a blanket around her shoulders. On the backs were handwritten dates and times. April 28th, May 2nd, May 4th. I laid them out on the desk in order. Then I reached for the flash drive. "Do you know what's on this?" I asked. Mara shook her head. I only knew it was there. I didn't open anything. There was an old laptop in the corner cabinet, already plugged in. I sat down, inserted the drive, and waited while the screen came to life. The desktop was plain. No family photo, no wallpaper, just a gray background and neatly named folders. The flash drive contained 4 files. Plate numbers, PI invoice call log. If anything happens, I opened the invoice first. It was from a private investigations firm in Brookmere, dated May 3rd, and billed to a client whose name was blacked out with marker in the scanned copy. But the subject line remained visible, Surveillance re, minor female, possible location confirmation below that were itemized charges for mileage, photo documentation, 2 days of surveillance, and address verification. The property address was the farmhouse. I read the page twice, then looked up at Mara. Someone hired a private investigator to find Lily. Her face flattened in a way that told me she was not surprised, only tired of being right. "Can you print that?" she asked. Yes. I printed 2 copies. Then I opened plate numbers. It was a simple list. Vehicle descriptions, partial tags, dates observed near the property, times, direction of travel. Daniel had been documenting suspicious vehicles. One entry matched the truck I had just seen. Dark Ford pickup. Dust along lower panels. Front plate bent at left corner. Date first observed, May 1st. My hands went cold. He'd seen him before, I said. Mara came around the desk then and looked over my shoulder. That's his truck. The next file, call log, was more concerning. It was not a phone company report. It was Daniel's own typed notes. Missed calls from blocked numbers. A man who did not identify himself asking whether the farmhouse was still occupied. 2 calls cut off after silence. One message left at his office downtown by someone asking whether the girl from Pike County was still under his roof. And then on May 8th, if contacted again, go directly to sheriff. Bring surveillance photos, invoice copy, Lily's statement if willing. Do not wait. He had made himself a plan. The last file was a document rather than a spreadsheet. If anything happens. I opened it and found a letter addressed to me. Elaine, if you are reading this, events have moved faster than I wanted. I am sorry for that and for many things that would take too long to explain properly here. What matters first is this. The people at the house are there because I believed they were in immediate danger. I made choices I can defend, even if I cannot defend keeping them from you. I stopped. The room had become very quiet around me. I kept reading. There were no grand declarations. That was never his style. He wrote with the same discipline he used in grocery lists and tax folders. But for the first time since his death, I felt as though I was hearing his actual mind rather than his daily voice. He wrote that his younger sister had died at 19 after trying to leave a violent man. He wrote that the official record called it an accident on a staircase. He wrote that he had spent years understanding that paperwork can move from secrecy to legality as fast as possible. If you choose to close the property, I will understand that too, though only in theory. The truth is I am asking more of you than I ever had the right to ask. I read the 3 steps again. It was such a Daniel thing to leave behind, an apology folded inside a checklist. I did not cry. Not then. What I felt was sharper than grief and steadier than panic. The room, the files, the photographs, the invoice, the calm wording of that letter, everything in front of me was changing the shape of the situation. Aaron Pike was no longer just a threatening man on a porch. He was part of a pattern. Daniel had seen it, documented it, prepared for it, and then he had died on the day he intended to go to the sheriff. I printed the letter. Then I pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer and uncapped one of Daniel's pens. At work, when an account is tangled or a vendor dispute starts to spread, I do the same thing every time. I stop reacting to the whole mess and divide it into controllable parts. It is not dramatic. It is simply how order begins. I wrote at the top of the page. Immediate under that, I made 3 lines. Step 1, copy and secure all records. Step 2, report today, in person if possible. Step 3, identify legal exposure and next shelter options. Mara watched me write. You do this a lot? She asked. Not this, I said. But systems, yes. She gave a small nod. Good. I printed everything relevant. The PI invoice, the plate log, the call notes, Daniel's letter. Then I checked the file cabinets. One held tax records for the property, utility bills, supply receipts, repair invoices, and what appeared to be a separate ledger of operating costs. The other held resident files in manila folders, each with minimal identifying information and, where possible, referral notes to clinics, legal aid offices, and county agencies. He had protected privacy, but he had not worked carelessly. He had built a shadow system beside the official one. And now, as his letter made plain, the shadow part had to end. From upstairs came the sound of a soft footstep, then silence. Lily, moving carefully. Listening. I checked the time on my phone. Aaron had left less than 30 minutes earlier. If he was serious, he might circle back. If he was reckless, he might not wait. Mara, I said, is there anyone else due here today? She thought for a second. Tessa should be back within the hour. She took her little boy to a clinic appointment. All right. I wrote 2 more notes. Arrival risk, warn before turning into drive, keep everyone in house until further notice. Then I looked at the office window, the line of sight to the drive, the papers spread across the desk, and the neat violence of Daniel's preparation. He had known this was coming. Maybe not every detail, but enough to leave a path. The first stage of grief had made me feel as though life was happening to me. That feeling was over. I lifted the phone, called the sheriff's office, and asked for the name of the duty deputy covering the Red Hollow area. Then I waited. The dispatcher transferred me twice before I reached someone who could do more than take a message. His name was Deputy Nolan Reeves. His voice was plain, alert, not rushed. I gave him the property address, said I had inherited the farmhouse from my late husband, and told him there had just been an unwelcome visit from a man named Aaron Pike who was looking for a teenage girl he claimed was his stepdaughter. There was a brief pause. Then Deputy Reeves said, "Stay on the line and start at the beginning." So I did. Not every emotion, not every confusion, just the facts in order. Daniel's death, the farmhouse, the women living there, the surveillance photographs, the private investigator's invoice, the truck on the property, the statement Aaron had made on the porch about my husband knowing better than to stand in his way. When I finished, he said, "Do not delete anything. Do not move the papers off-site yet. I'm coming out." That was the first useful sentence anyone had spoken to me all day. I wrote his name on the yellow pad and underlined it once. Then I shifted to the next part. At a certain point, if you are frightened enough, your mind can either scatter or narrow. Mine narrowed. I stopped wondering what kind of wife I had been, or whether I should have known more, or what any of this said about the life I had been living. Those questions were still there, but they no longer had priority. The work in front of me had priority. I drew a line down the legal pad and made 2 columns. Risk on the left. Control on the right. Under risk, I wrote, Aaron returns residents arriving unaware records damaged or taken girl too frightened to speak no formal legal status for property use under control, I wrote. Lock exterior doors, call incoming resident before arrival copy records, immediately get voluntary statement when begin attorney contact. It was not elegant. It did not need to be. It only needed to be useful. Mara stood beside the desk, arms folded loosely. What can I do? Do you have the number for Tessa? She nodded. Call her. Tell her not to turn into the drive until she speaks to one of us first. If she's already on the road, have her stop somewhere public. Mara took out her phone and stepped into the hall. I turned to the printer again. 2 copies became 3. 1 for law enforcement. 1 for a lawyer. 1 to stay with me. Then I found a portable file box in the closet and started loading the copies into it in the same sequence as the originals. Photographs. Invoice. Vehicle notes. Call log. Daniel's letter. Behind those, I placed a fresh legal pad, 2 pens, and a folder for anything new that came in after today. I have spent most of my working life around records. Payroll corrections. Supplier disputes. Benefit forms filed wrong and fixed later. I know the difference between a mess and a structure. A mess is hard to defend because nothing connects. A structure can hold weight because every piece has a place. Daniel had left a structure. I was beginning to understand that my part was not to reinvent it. My part was to move it into daylight without letting it break. When Mara came back, she said, Tessa answered. She pulled into a gas station in Millstone. She and the little boy are waiting there. Good. I wrote her name down too. Then I asked, do you know where the exterior keys are kept? She gave me a look that suggested she was recalculating me. In the kitchen drawer by the sink, she said. Back locks, shed locks, side entry. I found them exactly where she said. From there I did something that would have seemed absurd to me a week earlier. I walked the whole first floor like it was a building under review. Front lock working. Back deadbolt aligned. Side mudroom door secure. Kitchen windows latched. Curtains that could be closed if needed. Porch sightline clear. Secondary exit through pantry if front entry was blocked. As I checked each one, I said it aloud quietly, mostly for myself. Front secure. Then I waited half a second and moved on. Back secure. It helped. In the living room, I noticed the broken pattern in the dust on the mantel where someone had recently moved 2 photo frames a few inches to the left. Small things were becoming visible now that I was looking in the right way. The house was not just occupied. It had routines. The fruit bowl in the kitchen held bananas too ripe to be Daniel's. The refrigerator had masking tape labels in different handwriting. A child's cup sat upside down on a dish towel near the sink. On the windowsill by the stairs was a neat row of prescription bottles with initials instead of full names. This was not temporary in the casual sense. It was temporary in the fragile sense. The kind that lasts longer than expected because no safer version has opened up yet. I heard a soft sound behind me and turned. Lily stood near the bottom stair, one hand on the post. She looked smaller than she had earlier, if that was possible. Not because she was physically small, though she was. Because fear had folded her inward. "Is he gone?" she asked. "For now," I said. She nodded, then looked at the file box on the table. "You found everything." "Not everything," I said. "Enough to start." She looked toward the front door. "He won't stop." Mara came in from the kitchen then and put a hand lightly between Lily's shoulder blades. "Not pushing. Just there." "Maybe not," Mara said. "But now there's a record." That seemed to matter. I turned to Lily. "Deputy Reeves is on the way. You do not have to say anything the minute he arrives. But if you can tell him what you know, it will help." Her mouth tightened. "If I say it out loud, does that mean he finds me faster?" "No," I said. I made sure I answered slowly. "It means he has less room to lie." She looked at me for a long second. Then she asked, "Are you going to make us leave?" The question was so direct that it cleared the air in the room. It also explained a great deal. The guardedness, the quick assessments, the way Mara had watched every move I made. Their fear was not only of Aaron. It was of me, of the widow with legal rights and no history with them, who could decide in 5 minutes that the safest solution was for all of this to disappear. I did not answer quickly, because anything quick would have sounded careless. "What I am going to do," I said, "is move this property out of the category of secret and into the category of protected. Those are not the same thing. But I'm not throwing anyone out today." Lily blinked, then looked down. Mara's expression did not soften exactly, but something in it settled. That was when I realized a second shift had happened. Earlier in the day, I had thought I was walking into a mystery. By now, it was less a mystery than an operation under strain. The emotional part was still there, of course. Betrayal, grief, the ache of finding out your marriage had whole wings you never entered. But emotion, by itself, was not going to keep anyone safe. What would keep people safe was sequence. Step 1. Secure information. Step 2. Stabilize the house. Step 3. Bring in systems bigger than one careful dead man could manage alone. I wrote those steps again, larger this time, and tore the sheet off the pad. I taped it inside the office cabinet door where I could see it every time I opened it. Then the phone rang. Not mine. The house line. I stared at it for 1 beat too long before Mara said, "He almost never used that." It rang again. The old cordless handset sat in its charger on a side table near the kitchen doorway. I walked over, lifted it, and said, "Hello." For a second, there was only static. Not much. Just enough to tell me the line was live. Then a man's voice said, "You should leave this alone." I recognized it at once. Aaron. I did not ask how he got the number. "Deputy Reeves is on his way," I said. He gave a short laugh. "Then you'd better decide what story you want to tell. A dead man hiding women in a farmhouse doesn't sound good from the outside." I leaned one hand against the table and kept my tone level. "You hired a private investigator to locate a minor. You came onto my property and attempted to gain entry. You implied knowledge of my husband's death. I'm comfortable with my side of that comparison. Silence. Not empty silence. Listening silence. Then he said, "You don't know what she is." The phrasing struck me. Not what she did. What she is. The language of someone who had already reduced her from person to problem. "I know she's not yours to retrieve," I said. He let out a breath that sounded almost amused. "You sound organized." "I am." Another pause. Then the line went dead. I set the phone back in its charger. My hand was steady now. Mara had heard enough of the exchange to understand who it was. "Did he threaten you?" "No," I said. "Not directly." I picked up the pen again and added a new line under risk. "Direct contact escalating under control." I wrote. Document exact wording, then I wrote down the time of the call and as much of the exchange as I could remember line for line. At work, I do not trust memory when a written record is possible. That habit had never seemed especially personal before. It had simply been professional. Sitting there in Daniel's office, I saw something I had missed all through our marriage. This was one of the hidden places where he and I had actually been alike. Not in speech, not in openness, but in method. He had built safety out of paper trails. I could do that too. 20 minutes later, Tessa arrived, but not at the house. She parked just outside the closed gate and called Mara, who walked down to meet her. I watched from the office window as they returned together, Tessa carrying a diaper bag and guiding a little boy with one mitten half off his hand. He stopped to look at a puddle in the gravel like it was the most important thing in the world. That small normalness nearly undid me. A child had been living under this kind of pressure, and still there were mittens and appointments and bananas browning on the counter. Tessa was younger than I expected. Late 20s, maybe. Tired in the particular way mothers of small children often look tired, which is to say alert and worn at the same time. She took one look at me and understood immediately that I was not a volunteer or a caseworker. "You're Daniel's wife," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." She adjusted the little boy higher on her hip. "He said if anything ever happened to him, there might be someone who came out here and didn't know. He said to give that person time." I almost smiled at that. It sounded exactly like something he would arrange. Not trust. Not explanation. Time. What else did he say? I asked. She thought for a moment. "He said if it was you, you'd probably start with the records." Mara looked at me. I looked at the file box on the table. Then, despite everything, I let out one quiet breath that was almost a laugh. Deputy Reeves arrived just before dusk. His patrol SUV came up the drive with no lights, no unnecessary speed. He stepped out carrying a notepad and a hard plastic evidence envelope. Mid-40s. Broad-shouldered. Clean uniform. Tired eyes that still seemed awake. He did not walk in like someone taking over. He walked in like someone prepared to sort. That, more than anything, made me think we might actually have a chance to move this into the right hands. I met him at the door with the file box already in my arms. Then I waited. Deputy Reeves did not begin with opinions. That helped. He set his hat on the corner of the entry table, took out a pen, and asked for names, dates, and sequence. I gave him the short version first. Daniel's death. The farmhouse. The residence. Aaron Pike's visit. The surveillance materials in the office. The phone call that had come in after I contacted the sheriff's office. Then I handed him the copies. He did not rush through them. He stood in Daniel's office under the desk lamp, reading one page at a time, pausing where the dates matched, where the notes lined up, where a detail repeated itself in different forms. Invoice. Vehicle log. Call record. Daniel's final written instructions. "That's your husband's handwriting on the labels?" he asked. "Yes." "And the typed notes?" "Also his, as far as I can tell." "It's his wording. His formatting, too." Deputy Reeves nodded and slid the papers back into a clean stack. "All right," he said. "This is useful. Useful. Not dramatic. Not shocking. Useful." I appreciated that more than he probably knew. He asked if the girl was willing to speak. I told him I thought she might be if he kept it simple. He said he would. So we moved into the living room, where the lamps had been switched on and the house had taken on that strange evening feeling some homes get in the middle of a hard day. Warm light. Quiet rooms. Everyone speaking a little lower than usual. Lily sat at one end of the couch. Mara sat nearby but did not crowd her. Tessa had taken her son upstairs after feeding him crackers in the kitchen. I could hear his small feet moving once in a while over our heads. Deputy Reeves crouched a little rather than standing over Lily. He did not soften his voice in a false way. He just made it steadier. "You don't have to tell me everything tonight," he said. "I only need enough to understand whether this man should be kept away from this property and from you." Lily looked at him, then at her hands. "He's my stepfather," she said quietly. "My mom married him when I was 8. Reeves waited. "When I got older, he started coming into my room," she said. The sentence changed the room. No one interrupted. No one made a sound. Mara looked down. I kept my eyes on the deputy because I wanted to see whether he flinched or doubted or shifted into that careful official tone people use when they are already distancing themselves. He did not. Lily went on in short pieces. Her mother had tried to intervene. There had been violence. A hospital visit after one bad night. No charges that held. Later, after her mother was gone from the house for work or errands, Erin's behavior got worse. Threats if she told anyone. Threats if she tried to run. Threats about what would happen to her mother. Finally, she had left. Bus station. No real plan. Daniel finding her there. Deputy Reeves asked only a few clarifying questions. Dates where she could remember them. Whether there had been messages after she left. Whether Erin had ever said he would come after anyone helping her. She nodded yes to that one. Then Reeves asked, "Would you be willing to make a formal statement tomorrow with an advocate present?" Lily looked terrified again, but she nodded. "Yes," she said. He wrote that down. Then he turned to Mara, then to Tessa after she came back downstairs, and took shorter background statements from both of them. How long they had lived there. What Daniel's arrangement had been. Whether either of them had seen suspicious vehicles before today. Whether they knew anything directly about Daniel's last week alive. Tessa mentioned something I had not heard yet. About 10 days before he died, she said, he told me not to use the front drive if I saw a dark pickup parked on the county road. He said circle once, keep going, and call from town. Deputy Reeves looked up. Did he say why? He said someone had started watching patterns. That phrase felt like Daniel too. Not just watching the house. Watching patterns. Reeves added it to his notes. When the interviews were done, he asked to see exactly where Erin had stood on the porch and where the truck had been parked. I walked him outside. The air had gotten colder. The sky was almost fully dark. The gravel held the day's last pale light in patches, and beyond that the property dropped into shadow. I showed him the tire marks that were still visible near the edge of the drive. He used a flashlight and crutch to inspect them, then moved his beam slowly toward the porch steps. Did he touch the door? He asked. I don't believe so. Try not to wipe down anything tonight. I wasn't planning to. He glanced up at me then, just briefly, and I think that was the first moment he decided I was going to be an asset rather than a complication. Back inside, he stood at the kitchen counter and outlined what could happen next. There are really 2 tracks here, he said. One is immediate safety. The other is formal process. I took out the legal pad and wrote that down exactly. He continued. Immediate safety means patrol presence, incident documentation, no one here alone if possible, and a direct call to us if Erin Pike appears again or contacts the property again. I wrote in clean block letters. Formal process means a recorded statement from Lily, a petition for a protection order, and a separate review of your husband's death based on what you've shown me here. At that, I stopped writing for half a second. You think it's enough to reopen? I think it's enough to ask questions that should have been asked already. That was all he offered. No promise. No theatrical suspicion. Just the narrow opening created by documented concern. I respected that too. He asked for the original materials, then reconsidered and said no. Keep the originals secured here tonight. I'm taking the copies now, and I'll return with an evidence technician tomorrow morning for the rest. Less chance of something getting lost in transition. Again, useful. I asked, what about the legal status of the house? He leaned one hand against the counter. That's where this gets complicated. Your husband was doing something morally understandable and legally messy. You know that already. Yes. You can't keep running it as an off-the-books refuge now that the location is compromised. But you also don't need to put people out to correct that. You need counsel, probably by morning. Someone who handles nonprofit housing or protective residential services, if you can find them. Temporary emergency occupancy can be defended a lot more easily if you start moving toward compliance immediately. I wrote that down too. Move toward compliance immediately. He saw me writing and said, "You work in law." Accounting. That tracks. There was no smile with it, but the corners of his mouth shifted. Before leaving, he gave me his direct card with a handwritten number on the back. Use this one, not dispatch, if he comes back tonight. Then he looked around the kitchen once more. Coats drying by the mudroom. Tessa rinsing a child's cup. Mara standing by the stove with her arms folded. Lily sitting very straight at the table as though she thought any sign of collapse might undo what she had just managed to say. Reeves put his hat back on. "You all did the right thing by calling," he said. Then he left. After the patrol SUV disappeared down the drive, the house fell quiet in a different way than before. Not safe, exactly, but arranged. Named. We were no longer inside a confusion. We were inside a process. That matters more than people think. I made tea because it was the next reasonable thing to do. Not herbal. Just black tea in the dented kettle I found in the cabinet by the stove. The ordinary sound of water heating, cups set down, spoons against ceramic, it steadied the room. Tessa took hers with too much sugar. Mara drank hers plain. Lily wrapped both hands around the mug and did not drink for several minutes. She only let the heat stay in her fingers. No one spoke much at first. Then Tessa asked, "What happens now?" I looked at the legal pad beside my cup. My handwriting filled 2 pages by then. Names, times, tasks, numbers. It looked almost indecently calm compared to the day itself. I answered the only honest way. "Now I stop thinking like a widow who found something shocking," I said. "And I start thinking like the person responsible for what comes next." Mara watched me for a second. "That's a pretty big shift for one day." "Yes," I said. "It is." I did not dress it up beyond that. Then I turned the legal pad around so all 3 women could see it and said, "This is the order as I see it. Tell me if I'm missing something." I wrote a fresh page. Tomorrow 1. Meet deputy and evidence technician. 2. Get Lily with an advocate for a formal statement. 3. Call attorney. 4. Freeze all casual arrivals to the property. 5. Inventory who is living here and what each person needs in the next 7 days. Mara leaned over the table. Add medication refills. I added it. Tessa said, and school paperwork. I've been using a mailing address in town for some of my son's forms. I added that too. Lily stared at the list and asked, "Do I have to leave for any of this?" "No," I said. "Not unless a court or an advocate tells us there is a better placement for you. And even then, no one will move you like freight." She lowered her eyes to the table. "Okay." Then Mara asked the harder question. "What if Aaron shows up with a lawyer? Or family? Or some story about Daniel kidnapping girls and hiding them out here?" There it was. Not fear in the loose sense. Fear with shape. Fear with anticipated language. I answered before I had fully decided whether the answer would comfort anyone. Then we define reality before he does. The room stayed still. "We do it with dates," I said. "Records. Witnesses. Intake notes. Medical referrals. Call logs. Patrol reports. Protection orders. If he brings a story, we bring a file." No one spoke for a moment. Then Mara sat back in her chair and gave one small nod. "That," she said, "sounds like Daniel." I looked at the office door down the hall. "It may," I said, "but I'm not doing it in secret." That, I think, was the true beginning of the confrontation, not the porch, not the phone call, not even the deputy's visit. The real confrontation began there at the kitchen table, when I understood that whatever happened next would not be won by a better threat or a louder voice. It would be won by the right record being in the right hands before Aaron Pike could define the house for us. I slept at the farmhouse that night, not because I trusted the locks completely, and not because I felt brave. Mostly because leaving would have felt like abandonment. I took the small downstairs room Daniel had apparently used on long days when weather made the roads bad. The sheets in the closet smelled of detergent and cedar. I set my shoes beside the bed, laid the deputy's card on the nightstand, and put the file box on the floor where I could touch it without getting up. Then I turned off the lamp. From somewhere upstairs came the low murmur of women settling in for the night. A door opening softly. A child coughing once in his sleep. Pipes ticking. Heat moving through old walls. I was nearly asleep when I heard it. Not loud. Just the crunch of gravel under slow tires beyond the front of the house. I opened my eyes and stayed still in the dark. Then I waited. I did not move right away. When you hear something outside a house at night, especially after the kind of day we had just had, the body wants to decide too quickly. Either dismiss it or panic. I did neither. I lay still and listened. The tires did not continue up the drive. They stopped somewhere near the road. A minute passed. Then another. No engine cut off. No door slam. No footsteps on the porch. I reached for my phone, checked the time, and then picked up Deputy Reeves's card from the nightstand. I did not call yet. First, I went to the window, lifted one corner of the curtain, and looked out toward the front gate. Headlights. Low and stationary. Watching. That was enough. I called the number on the back of the card. Reeves answered on the third ring, sounding awake. "It's Elaine Mercer," I said quietly. "There's a vehicle stopped just beyond the gate. Headlights on. It's been there at least 2 minutes. Stay inside," he said. "Do not go onto the porch. I'm 10 minutes out." So I stayed inside. I went room to room on the first floor without turning on any new lights. Front door still locked. Back door locked. Side entrance locked. I checked once, then stopped myself from checking again. Repetition without purpose does not make anything safer. Mara appeared at the top of the stairs in a robe and socks. "What is it?" "Vehicle at the gate. Deputies on the way." She nodded once and disappeared back upstairs, no wasted motion. Within minutes, I heard the patrol SUV coming fast, but controlled down the county road. The headlights at the gate went dark, then swung away. Reeves must have seen the movement too, because he turned after it without stopping at the house. I stood by the front window and watched the red taillights disappear beyond the trees. He called me 20 minutes later. "Couldn't catch him," he said. "Dark pickup, likely the same one." He pulled off through a service road past Miller's Field. I've got a timestamp and direction of travel. That goes in the report. Useful again. The next morning started early. Very early. I was up before dawn, standing in Daniel's kitchen in borrowed slippers, making coffee in a machine that hissed like it resented being used by strangers. The house felt worn out but functional, the way people do after they have made it through something without yet understanding the full cost. I opened the legal pad and created a new page. Today, confirmed night vehicle logged deputy pursued. No stop evidence pickup scheduled attorney call first available hour advocate for Lily. I set the phone face down beside the pad and waited for offices to open. By 8:30, Deputy Reeves was back with an evidence technician and a woman from the County Victim Services office named Brenda Holt. Brenda was in her 50s, soft-spoken, practical, with a canvas bag full of forms and tissues and the kind of flat shoes people wear when they know they'll be on their feet in difficult rooms. She sat with Lily in the small side room near the kitchen while Reeves and the technician worked through Daniel's office. I stayed with the records. Not hovering. Organizing. Originals were matched to copies. Each document was dated, described, and placed in sequence. The technician photographed the desk compartment, the envelope, the flash drive, the printed photos, the labels, the file cabinet contents. Reeves asked me a few clarifying questions as they worked. "Your husband died on May 9th? "Yes." "And his typed note says he intended to go to the sheriff on May 9th? "Yes." "And the surveillance invoice is dated May 3rd? "Yes." Those kinds of questions matter because they convert suspicion into timeline. By 10:15, Brenda came out of the side room with Lily and said, "She's ready." Reeves took the formal statement in Daniel's office with the door closed and Brenda beside her. I did not sit in. That was not my role. Instead, I called the attorney Mr. Bell had recommended, a woman named Sandra Vale who handled nonprofit formation and housing compliance. When her receptionist tried to offer me a consultation for the following week, I said, In the calmest voice I had, I have inherited an occupied rural property currently sheltering women fleeing abuse. Law enforcement is on site. The previous owner is deceased. I need legal structure, emergency occupancy guidance, and exposure review today. That changed the rhythm of the call. Sandra got on the line herself within 4 minutes. Start from the sentence that matters most, she said. I liked her immediately. So I did. When I finished, she said, do not remove current residents. Do not accept new ones. Do not advertise the property. I can be there at 2. I wrote every word down. By noon, the evidence technician had packed the originals for intake, leaving me with my copies and a receipt inventory. Reeves stood with me at the kitchen counter and reviewed the next stage. We have enough for an emergency protective filing based on Lily's statement and the property contact, he said. We're also adding last night's vehicle presence to the pattern. And Daniel's death? He tapped one finger on the copy of the call log. That's going to move slower. But I've already requested the original accident file and tow photographs. If something was missed, dates like these are where we start. Again, no promise. Just process. That afternoon, Sandra Vale arrived in a navy coat with 2 legal pads and a laptop. She did not waste anyone's time with sympathy statements or speeches about what an unusual situation this was. She toured the first floor, asked who was currently living there, what utilities were in whose name, whether anyone was paying rent, whether there had ever been any written occupancy agreements, whether the county had ever inspected the property for residential licensing, whether there were smoke detectors in every bedroom, whether there was a second egress route from the upstairs rooms. She was not trying to be difficult. She was defining reality. That is a form of help, even when it is not comforting. By the end of 2 hours, she had outlined exactly what had to happen. The farmhouse could not legally continue as an invisible refuge, but it could potentially be stabilized as transitional residential housing if I moved quickly and accepted oversight. That meant temporary occupancy documentation, fire inspection, insurance review, entity formation, basic employment structure if anyone was acting in a staff role, relationship with a licensed domestic violence organization, mandatory reporting boundaries, intake policy, records policy, incident log, background checks if volunteers were eventually involved. The list was long. It did not frighten me. Lists rarely do. What frightened me was disorder, and this was no longer disorder. It was a difficult conversion. Sandra closed her laptop and looked at me over the kitchen table. You have 2 choices, she said. Shut it down in stages and place current residents elsewhere, or keep the residents in place while we build legal scaffolding underneath them very quickly. I asked, which is safer? For the women? Yes. She considered that carefully. In the immediate term, staying may be safer, provided law enforcement remains aware of the address, and we tighten every procedure starting now. That was enough for me. Then that's the path, I said. Mara, who had been standing near the sink the whole time pretending not to listen too closely, looked down at the counter and let out one quiet breath. Sandra nodded. All right. Then we do it properly. That was the strategic shift becoming real. Not just in my head. In the room. In law. In paper. Over the next 10 days, the truth came in through documents, numbers, and confirmations exactly the way it should. Lily's protection order was granted on an emergency basis first, then extended after a hearing where Aaron Pike failed to appear on time and then arrived angry enough to hurt himself. He had brought a lawyer who seemed underprepared and deeply uncomfortable. We did not have to out anyone. We only had to hand over the timeline, his surveillance effort, his contact with the property, his phone call, the late-night vehicle presence, Lily's statement, Daniel's records showing prior concern. The judge read more than he spoke. That was a good sign. The order was granted in full. A week later, things tightened further. During a parole compliance review triggered by the hearing record and new complaints, Pike's phone was searched under existing supervision terms. They found contact information for the private investigations firm, payment confirmations, and message history that placed him near the farmhouse repeatedly before Daniel's death. Not proof of murder, but proof of pursuit. Enough, at minimum, to make the rest of his denials collapse under their own weight. Deputy Reeves called me himself with that update. "Thought you'd want the clean version," he said. "He's in custody on separate violations for now." That buys time. I wrote it down word for word after I hung up. Sandra, meanwhile, had incorporated the first legal shell for the property by the end of the month. Temporary board. Interim compliance plan. Insurance rider. Draft intake packet. Draft release forms. Incident reporting binder in the office. Fire extinguishers checked. Locks rekeyed. Exterior cameras installed without making the place feel like a facility. Mara became essential almost immediately. She knew what forms would overwhelm someone on arrival. She knew when silence meant fear and when it meant refusal. She helped me strip the intake process down to something survivable. Tessa helped too, especially with the practical side. Food storage. Child schedules. What kind of posted rules actually got followed in a house where people were healing? And I, apparently, became the person who handled systems. That sounds colder than it felt. What I mean is, I knew how to turn a vulnerable process into a documented one without draining all the humanity out of it. Daniel had done that privately. I was doing it in the open. The question of his death remained slower and heavier. The accident file was reopened. Reeves told me that much. A mechanical review of the vehicle was requested again. Old scene photographs were re-examined. Cell location records and call timing were pulled where they still could be. A feed store owner along the route later remembered seeing a dark pickup pulled off near Moreland Pass the morning Daniel died. The statement came late and was imperfect, like many truthful memories are. Still, it joined the timeline. No one promised me a murder charge. I did not ask for promises. What I wanted, and what finally came, was correction. 3 months later, the medical examiner's amended review and the collision consultant's report stopped short of naming a homicide, but they did conclude that Daniel's crash involved roadway interference consistent with another vehicle forcing or crowding his car near the shoulder before the descent. That changed the official language from simple accidental loss of control to suspicious fatal collision pending prosecutorial review. It was not everything. It was enough. Enough to stop the lie from settling permanently into the record. When I got that call, I was in the farmhouse pantry checking canned goods against an order sheet. The late afternoon light was coming through the small window over the shelves, and someone upstairs was vacuuming. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary tasks. I stood there holding a clipboard while Deputy Reeves said, "The record has changed." I closed my eyes once and said, "Thank you." There are people who imagine resolution as a dramatic release. Tears. Shouting. Collapse. Mine was quieter. I finished the call, wrote down the exact wording, put the clipboard back on the shelf, and then stood for a moment with one hand on the pantry door. The truth had not arrived beautifully. It had arrived correctly. And sometimes that is the better gift. By early fall, the property had a temporary operating agreement with a regional domestic violence organization. We were not fully built yet, but we were no longer hidden. We had inspection dates, forms, contact lists, safe transport procedures, medication logs, and a locked records room that did not depend on one man's memory and conscience to function. Aaron Pike remained in custody long enough for the house to breathe.